So what happens when you take the most central, untouchable date of an entire belief system, isolate it completely, and put it under the microscope of your own Bible translation?
You mean finding out the puzzle pieces don't quite fit the way we've been taught for decades?
Exactly. I mean, usually we look at a historical date like it's carved in stone, right? You point to the calendar and say, right here, this is where world history changed.
Yeah, but when you step into the world of prophetic interpretation, that calendar gets incredibly complex really fast.
And that is exactly what we are getting into in today's deep dive. We're talking directly to you, our listener, because our goal today is to unpack a highly specific theological analysis regarding the Gegenwart, the presence or arrival of Jesus Christ.
Right.
Specifically, we're putting the doctrine surrounding the year 1914 under a serious cross-examination.
And just to lay the foundation and be completely transparent here, we are relying on a single, very detailed source today. It's a video analysis that builds a really stringent theological argument.
Yeah, all of our material today comes entirely from a video uploaded by the YouTube channel for Jehovah's.
Yeah.
And we need to make something crystal clear right out of the gate here.
Absolutely.
We are sitting at these microphones as strictly neutral observers. We are not taking sides. We aren't validating or endorsing the theological claims in the video. We are just here as your guides, to help you understand the exact arguments and the biblical interpretations that the creator is presenting.
Because the analytical approach of this video is, well, it's fascinating. The core tension is basically this. What timeline of events do you get if you strictly use the Neue Weltübersetzung and just let the texts speak entirely for themselves?
Right, without any outside frameworks.
Exactly. The source argues in great detail that an unbiased reading points to a radically different sequence of events than what traditional understanding touches.
So let's just jump straight into that argument. I mean, the theological pivot point of the Gesellschaft is the teaching that Jesus began ruling invisibly in the heavens in late 1914.
Yeah, that's the foundation.
But the video attacks that exact premise. The central question it asks is, did an invisible presence actually start in 1914? And the video starts right at the Greek root word parousia.
Yeah, so parousia literally means presence or arrival. And to define when this presence actually begins, the source pulls two very specific statements from Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew.
Okay.
First, there's Matthew 18, verse 20, where Jesus says he is there wherever two or three are gathered in his name. So that already establishes a form of ongoing presence.
Right.
But the absolute core argument hinges on Matthew 28, verse 20. This is right before his ascension, and Jesus gives his disciples an unmistakable promise. He says, literally, I am with you all the days until the Abschluss des System der Dinge.
Wow, okay, that is a huge point. Because if we follow the video's logic there, that implies he never actually left the system, or at least he never left his followers. He's just been there the whole time.
Exactly. The conclusion the source draws is brilliantly simple, really. According to these texts, Jesus has already been invisibly present continuously since his ascension. So the video argues very forcefully that searching the scriptures for a second, separate invisible presence that supposedly kicked off centuries later in 1940, well, you'll be searching in vain. The source claims that a second invisible starting point just does not exist in the text.
It's like, it reminds me of a phone analogy. Imagine you have a friend who promises, hey, I'm going to stay on the line with you all night. I'm listening. I'm here.
Right.
And you trust that. But then, decades later, somebody else comes along and tells you, actually, no, your friend only dialed in yesterday at midnight.
That's a great way to put it.
The video is basically asking why wait for an invisible arrival if he never actually hung up the phone. But that immediately makes me wonder, if the source is claiming he's already visibly present, how do they interpret the actual promised return? He has to come back somehow.
So this is where the video makes a very deliberate shift from the spiritual to a highly physical level. The creator contrasts the doctrine of a purely invisible spirit creature with, well, massive literal physicality.
Right, the video explicitly uses Luke 24 here, verses 39 through 43. I mean, that's that striking post-resurrection scene where Jesus eats the broiled fish.
Exactly.
He tells the disciples to touch him, and he emphasizes that a spirit does not have flesh and bones. It's an incredibly physical, tangible image that the source brings to the table.
And he does that for a very specific reason. The source wants to establish that the resurrected Jesus wasn't some formless spirit, but had a glorified physical body. And then he connects this physical state directly to the ascension in Acts 1, verses 9 through 12.
Oh, right.
Remember, Jesus visibly ascends in a cloud, and the angels who appear, give the disciples a crystal clear message. They say, this Jesus will return in the exact same manner as they saw him go into heaven.
So bodily, visibly,
Yeah.
something human eyes can actually perceive.
Exactly. The logic in the video is razor sharp here. Because Jesus ascended literally, bodily, and visibly in a cloud, the text forces us to understand his return as a literal visible event, too. According to this reading, it's impossible for it to have been an unseen, spiritual assumption of power hidden away in 1914.
But wait, I have to push back a little here, kind of playing devil's advocate for our listeners.
Go for it.
The entire theological proof for 1914 relies incredibly heavily on the signs of the times. I'm talking about Matthew 24. Wars, famines, global pandemics, earthquakes, all the catastrophic stuff that has undeniably shaken the world since World War I.
Yeah, the classic signs.
If his true return is a purely physical, visible event in the future, what does this analysis say about all these global crises? I mean, they aren't happening in a vacuum.
That is the big objection, right? And the video spends a lot of time addressing that exact apparent contradiction. The creator goes deep into the end-time discourses in Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Okay.
And his argument is definitely not that these terrible world events are meaningless. The fundamental difference is how he places them chronologically. The video analyzes the text and concludes, these wars, diseases, and earthquakes are not evidence of a currently ongoing invisible presence.
Then what are they?
They are the Drangsal. They are precursors.
Mm.
In biblical terms, they're often translated as the pangs of distress. They build up, and they happen before the actual arrival.
Does that make sense?
The crucial point the video makes is that the true cosmic signs of the arrival, the sun darkening, the moon not giving its light, the stars falling, according to the Gospel's own timeline, those happen immediately after that Drangsal. Only then does the sign of the Son of Man appear.
Meaning the whole timeline effectively gets pushed back. Under this interpretation, the world is still just in the labor pangs, and the main event hasn't even happened yet.
Right.
And to back up this idea of a future visible arrival, the video pulls in Revelation 1 verse 7, doesn't it? That striking phrase, every eye will see him, and all the tribes of the earth will beat themselves in grief.
Exactly. And if all the tribes of the earth are beating themselves in grief, that implies an immediate global awareness. Yeah. The video concludes that the true parousia will be a sudden, globally visible shock to all of humanity. An event that absolutely no one can miss, especially non-believers. It's the exact opposite of a century-long invisible reign that the outside world is completely oblivious to.
You know what really gave me chills when the video broke down Matthew 24? It was this fascinating detail about deception.
Oh, the warnings. Yeah.
Jesus warns his followers 4 different times in that single chapter about being misled. He talks about false Christs and false prophets. But the creator of the video makes this incredibly specific observation.
Which one?
Jesus literally says, if people say to you, look, he is here in the wilderness, or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it.
That is honestly one of the strongest psychological arguments in the whole analysis.
It really is. The video interprets this warning to mean if someone has to explain to you that Jesus has already arrived because you can't see him, because he's hidden in the inner rooms or operating invisibly in heaven, that describes the exact deception Jesus was warning about. He's basically saying, if someone needs a complex theological proof to convince you I'm here, even though your eyes see nothing, don't believe them. My return will be as obvious as lightning flashing across the sky.
And if you accept that premise, the need for all these complex chronological calculations just completely collapses. A visible, undeniable event doesn't require math to prove it happened.
Which leads us to a massive historical puzzle. If the Neue Weltübersetzung, according to this deep textual analysis, points so clearly to a future, literally visible arrival, then where does this ironclad, immovable fixation on the year 1914 come from?
Right. Why is it so entrenched?
Exactly. Why is that date baked so deeply into the DNA of the community?
Well, to explain that theological stubbornness, the video actually steps away from the New Testament for a minute and builds a bridge between Old Testament prophecy and organizational history.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, there's a quick look at Zechariah 14, verses 3 and 4. It prophesies that Jehovah will go forth and the Mount of Olives will split. And the video reminds us that the Mount of Olives is the exact geographical spot where Jesus ascended from.
So it reinforces the idea of a literal, geographically grounded return.
Exactly. But the truly illuminating part of the analysis is when it jumps into late 19th century history.
Yes, this is where the video brings out the original historical documents. We are talking about the era of the Ernst Bible Forscher.
Yeah, the early Bible students.
The creator quotes directly from the literature of Charles T. Russell, specifically from issues of Zion's Wash Term from January 1904. And this is where the history gets really tangible.
It really does.
Because these old texts prove, in black and white, that 1914 was not originally taught as the start of the invisible presence at all. Charles T. Russell taught with absolute certainty that the invisible presence had already begun in the year 1874.
We really need to grasp the weight of that historical fact. That wasn't some minor footnote or a vague guess. It was the fundamental theological truth of that era.
Right.
1874 was taught as the beginning of the Gegenwart, and 1878 was taught as the time when Jesus assumed power and the resurrection began. The entire eschatological mash, the whole System der Ding, was built around those dates in the 19th century.
Which is the very definition of what we'd call altes licht today, old light.
Yeah.
But how does the video actually use this historical evidence in its argument?
The video deconstructs the aura of infallibility around 1914 by just factually showing that the calculation of prophetic dates was highly flexible. By showcasing this altes licht, the creator demonstrates that the organization has, in the past, been completely capable of massively shifting its most foundational pillars and timelines when the expected events, like the end of the world, just didn't happen.
Wow.
The entire theological architecture of the Gegenwart was simply picked up from 1874 and moved to 1914. So the analysis begs the unspoken question. If the absolute truth of 1874 had to be corrected later, how absolute is the truth of 1914?
So if the theological and historical basis for 1914 is that shaky, according to this analysis, what does the video claim is the real underlying reason it's still defended so fiercely today, over a century later? I mean, there has to be more at stake than just admitting a math error.
And that brings the video to its ultimate analytical climax. It moves beyond pure text exegesis and tackles the core question of organizational authority and legitimacy.
Okay.
The argument built here is fundamental. The source proposes that the Wachturmgesellschaft cannot abandon 1914 because its entire modern power structure is exclusively and inextricably tied to that date. If 1914 falls, the foundation of their authority falls with it.
You're going to have to explain that a bit more. How does the video construct that cause and effect relationship between the date and the authority?
The video traces the chain of current doctrine. Because Jesus supposedly began ruling invisibly in 1914, he subsequently, specifically between 1918 and 1919, conducted a spiritual inspection of all earthly religions. And based on that inspection, he selected a small, specific group of men, the Leitende Körperschaft, and officially appointed them as the Treuer and Verständiger Sklave over all his domestics.
I get it. So the absolute authority today relies on that appointment by Jesus.
Yes.
And that appointment relies on the inspection. And the inspection is the direct chronological result of him taking power in 1914.
Exactly. The video confronts the viewer at the end with this massive theological domino effect. If you pull the starting premise of 1914 out of the equation, because, as the video argues, the Bible teaches a future visible return, then in that exact same moment, the specific biblical justification for the existence and the unquestionable authority of the Leitende Körperschaft collapses.
Wow.
The profound question left hanging in the air is this. Does clinging to 1914 actually serve the objective truth of the biblical text, or does it primarily serve to secure the right of the organizational structure to exist?
That is heavy. Really deep stuff. We've moved through a ton of information, Bible texts and historical perspectives.
We really have.
So to make sure all of this is totally clear and easy to grasp for you, our listener, let's summarize the central arguments from the video in a clear structure. Let's just go through the key bullet points together.
Sounds good.
Point 1, the focus on the word parousia itself.
Right. First, the concept of parousia is not interpreted by the video creator as a secret, invisible presence. Instead, based on texts like Acts 1, it is seen as a literal, bodily, and visible physical arrival.
Secondly, the constant presence of Jesus. The video argues from Matthew 28 that an invisible presence of Jesus has already been ongoing continuously since his ascension. Therefore, looking for a second, new invisible presence starting in 1914 just isn't biblically supported.
Thirdly, the classification of world events. Wars, earthquakes, and global crises are classified as the Drangsal precursors. They are not evidence of a presence that has already begun. Instead, the actual arrival of Jesus is expected as a future shocking event that, according to Revelation, will be visible to every human eye.
Fourth, the historical precedent. Using the history of the Ernst Bible Forscher, the video reveals that the date of the Gegenwart has already been massively shifted in the past. This is the Altuslicht, back when 1874 was taught as the starting point instead of 1914.
And fifth, the question of authority. The analysis culminates in the thesis that the organization must hold on to 1914 because the absolute claim to authority by the Leitende Körperschaft, as the Treuer and Verständigersklev, is doctrinally tied directly to events that supposedly happened right after 1914. Without that year, their authority lacks its biblical foundation.
When you let all these arguments wash over you in their entirety, it leaves you with a certain feeling, a question you might want to mull over for yourself tonight when things quiet down.
Yeah, a thought that goes beyond just deciphering Bible verses. If the entire foundation of your belief system rests on the highly complex calculation of a specific year, and your own history proves that human interpretations of this prophetic math can shift, like they did from 1874 to 1914, how do you navigate your personal faith?
Especially if the changing world out there might eventually require the math to be adjusted yet again.
Exactly. What does true faith actually rest on at the end of the day? A calculated date on a calendar? Or the text itself?
That is a question that really lingers. Remember that microscope and the calendar from the beginning. Sometimes the big picture only becomes clear when you stop staring at a marked date on the wall
Why?
and instead start putting the text itself under the microscope to see what is actually written there.
Perfectly said.
We want to thank you so much for joining us on this really challenging deep dive. Keep staying curious, keep examining the scriptures, and keep questioning things.
Absolutely.
If you want to watch the original material we discussed in depth today and evaluate it for yourself, you can find the full video on the YouTube channel Hilfe für Zeugen Jehovah's. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.